All right. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. It's a great day. This is Gavin Gregory. We're going to go ahead and do the xSpace today on the digital asset recovery, the network access rules. We've got Global Ledger and BSV Association, Connor Murray. We've got Brian Doherty, Gregory Ward. Let's see. We have a panel full of speakers: Kurt Walker Jr., Michael Scott. This is going to be a full packed space, so stay tuned. Now, let me just do a quick summary of the network access rules, is the way I understand them. I did write a brief on this about 6 months ago when it came out, and I've summarized it as the network access rules establish a framework for node behavior compliance and dispute resolution in the Bitcoin network. They mandate adherence in the Bitcoin protocol, outline procedures for non-compliance, and establish the Bitcoin Association's authority to issue limited directives. The rules align with key concepts from Satoshi's white papers, such as decentralized consensus, proof of work, and network incentives. While introducing oversight mechanisms, the rules aim to preserve the fundamental principles of Bitcoin, as described in the white paper, balancing regulation with the core tenets of permissionless distributed network. And today we're going to break it all down, including this partnership, which has now been announced with Global Ledger and Bitcoin Association. So coming together with the on the Bitcoin blockchain, and I'm sure we'll probably hint at this 800-pound gorilla n-chain in the background, which is pretty much protecting the entire property over the intellectual property of the space. And one thing I recently found out was about the freaking NFT patent, which they had in 2016 before NFT started. So it's just it's absolutely phenomenal when you really get into this stuff and you see how it's planned out and how everybody is trying to play catch up to the n-chain group and the intellectual property, and also just the BSV blockchain overall. Everybody's playing catch up. Everybody's just saying, boy, wish it would have been there first. Copa, when I say everybody, I mean Copa, Crypto Open Patent Alliance, because they've all come together with this Crypto Open Patent Alliance, to attack everything n-chain, everything Craig Wright. All right, so let's go ahead and get started, and we'll go ahead and tune into the space right now. All right, I will see you at the top. What's up, everybody? Good morning. It's a great day. Yeah, this is going to be the regulatory shakeup, regulatory shakedown, the DAR, the NAR, BSV Association, Friday, October 4th, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Crypto regulation deep dive onto the BSV blockchain, featuring Bitcoin Beyond, Kurt Walker Jr., Michael Scott, Brian Doherty, Gregory Ward, Brett C. Banafy, among others. Global Ledger, a partnership with BSV Association, and it's going to be an all-out, just a freaking one to make for the record, for the ages. And we're going to open up into open forum and really just kind of break this whole thing down. Let me just do a background on this network access rules, the way I read through it. And when it first came out, I wrote a brief on it with Xiaowei. We took a deep dive into it when I read through it. But I will set a couple disclaimers here before we kind of get into it, that first of all, everybody who talks on the space is not giving legal advice or financial advice. This is just for entertainment purposes only. So anyone who gives their opinion or states things on here, please take note that it is just for entertainment purposes only. And so do your own research and get your own advice if that's what you're looking for in any of this stuff. All right, so that's on the record going forward. So now, regarding this network access rules, I did do a quick summary on this thing, and it was basically what we talked about, what it looked like. It was the network access rules established a framework for the node behavior, compliance, and the dispute resolution in the Bitcoin network. They mandate adherence in the Bitcoin protocol, outline procedures for non-compliance, and establish the Bitcoin Association's authority to issue limited directives. The rules align with key concepts from Satoshi's white papers, such as decentralized consensus, proof of work, and network incentives. While introducing oversight mechanisms, the rules aim to preserve the fundamental principles of Bitcoin and described in the white paper, balancing regulation and the core tenet of permissionless distributed network. So that being said, let's see if we could okay, Casey, I need to get you up on here so we could start adding everybody up here to the stage. Casey, you are on. You are here, and now we can invite. Okay, how do we? Oh, there's Connor. Connor. I see 11369 VSB. You're welcome to come up, Scott. I got. Who else did we have? Casey. Okay, I know we're looking for Global Ledger. Greg Maxwell is supposed to be here. He's coming in apparently, so he wants to talk about this. I guess that's what, So let's see. HoddleNot blocked me. I mean, come on. Why'd he block me, dude? I thought we were friends. Okay, here we go. By the way, Brett said, by the way, I really think that you're going to love Paul from Global Ledger. Paul from Global Ledger, Casey, is going to be here. So
on board.
Is he here?
Yes, yep. Yes, here. Nice to meet you, Gavin.
Oh, hey, Paul. Nice to meet you too.
I'm very happy to be here today, and obviously drop some bombs on the partnership that we've set up, and give a bit more industry insight to what Global Ledger are all about as well. But yeah, very happy to be here today.
Hey, nice, awesome. Yeah, if we could start with that, and let's say hi to Connor as well. Hey, Connor. Good morning. How you doing?
Hey, everyone. Good morning. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Excellent. Gregory Ward's here. Brian Doherty should be coming up here in a moment. Brett mentioned some other speakers that are going to be coming up. So yeah, there was an announcement. Kurt as well. Casey, if you want to, I'll message Kurt. We got this partnership that recently happened. It was announced, and I read the article on it, between Global Ledger and BSV Association, which is the security protocols are going to be strengthened. And so, you want to start with that, Connor, or Global Ledger? Did you want to start with that, Paul? Since it's your, yeah, go ahead.
Sure. No problems. Excellent. So yeah, coming into the ecosystem, which I was sort of fully aware of BSV and what's been happening over the years. Bit of a trepid ride, but it seems to me like in the industry, sometimes the bad actors are sort of fished out, and particularly with BSV and the ecosystem, there was a lot of investment there, a lot of use cases, which I personally feel are sort of a lot more suited as we step away from the financial side of the crypto industry. And really, yeah, our relationship spawned sort of back in March this year. I actually met Connor at the London Blockchain Conference. I'm based in the UK in London myself. And we sort of really hit it off. We went there as Global Ledger, knowing that we provide coverage on the BSV chain. Yeah, it was really sort of a landmark event for us to introduce ourselves as an AML provider for the ecosystem. Yeah, met Connor very briefly. We had a chat and discussed a few projects, and obviously the conversation came up, how's it going with the coverage on chain, obviously for any of the projects or for the ecosystem to be sort of moving forward with the new governance. And from those first initial stages of the conversation, we established a huge need there, being one of the only sole providers that actually provide coverage on the chain to help the growth and adoption sort of moving forward. And like I say, yeah, Connor and myself, we really hit it off from the get-go, shared a beer or two at the end of the conference as well. And then, yeah, really we put pen to paper and got down on working on our relationship between the two companies. But yeah, really the main points that I'd like to deliver today, is what this brings to the ecosystem, the opportunities and sort of the roadmap moving forward. From a regulatory and compliance side, this really does sort of open up the doors for the adoption, strengthening relationships with VASPs and exchanges where BSV is listed, helping projects to thrive and grow from a licensing perspective as well, because there's obviously a lot of obligations involved on both sides of the water, from the US side and the European side, where these solutions are needed with financial regulators for companies and projects to actually operate with on the market. So yeah, starting with that really, as the main topic, it brings, a lot more light into sort of like the industry standards for the BSV ecosystem. It really helps with sort of the scaling and adoption, as I mentioned, but this gives a platform in which, in terms of what other chains have the opportunity of when dealing in that side of the industry, and having that full sort of play and role of being accepted. But not only that, from a regulatory perspective. And what we look to do here is really to sort of scale the operations and everything that is to come. I can't obviously speak on behalf of the entire BSV Association, but I know there have been a lot of projects sort of waiting in the wings for this kind of adoption, to bring it forward, and on the plateau, that a lot of other projects from other chains get the benefits from. And now obviously BSV joining that race as well. But yeah, just as a sort of a brief overview of Global Ledger, we are a blockchain analytics provider. We have a cloud-based AML platform which helps for compliance teams to track and monitor assets, wallets, and obviously transaction monitoring. The general consensus of what the platform is used for is for onboarding of users, SAR reporting, which stands for suspicious activity reporting. If there's anything picked up like illicit activity on the chains or sanctions, anything like that, to identify and report to financial regulators. And then obviously as well for, keeping an eye on what's happening internally with any existing users, and being able to utilize the tool to monitor that. Second side of it, which is also applicable to the security protocols DAR, which is implemented into the BSV ecosystem. We do a lot of investigations. We work with the likes of Europol, Interpol, a lot of different law enforcement globally, asset recovery firms, which is also another joint partnership we have with BSV through token recovery. I'll let Connor dive into that a little bit more. But basically what this does is bolster that, increase the return speed when we're talking about assets being returned from whether it be hacks or scams, or whatever victims may have got themselves involved in. We also have a rather large global network of lawyers that we introduce for the process of litigation, and the recovery of assets. And basically we provide the forensical evidence for those cases. Obviously the DARP and the security protocols that BSV have actually make that process a lot more seamless than traditional asset recovery, just due to being able to back that up with the evidence of what's happened, and literally just being very easy and understandable for what happens within the court cases. And that's where we sort of step in with that forensic evidence to provide and ease those situations, making it more possible in the event of bad actors, victimizing users and projects on chain. And that's really what we're looking to, sort of evangelize on and make BSV a much safer space.
So Paul, this is really, so let me just ask you kind of summarize kind of where you're at right now and see if I can help me understand. For the regular consumer, let's say I'm a regular consumer and I want to benefit from the Global Ledger and the partnership. How do I benefit as a regular consumer from this?
Yeah, sure. So basically it's just enhanced security levels. So whereas there would not have been too much coverage or very light support of the BSV chain, or none at all in some instances, it does leave quite the hole there, if something was to go wrong with any, Ponzi's, anything like that. Where BSV users and retail users are unfortunately getting duped into these kind of situations. Now there is the possibility to have complete sort of holistic overview of what is happening on chain, and from that it just basically enables a lot more of a regulatory side for the case of where projects being adopted and gaining sort of regulatory ground, licenses through regulators. It just basically gives full monetization of that, so it can really give a sense of security to the end user. We can also provide sort of checks, give source of funds reports, and just back up a lot of things when it comes to auditing, taxation, a number of different things. But the transparency is probably really one of the most biggest points of what this collaboration stands for.
So do I understand it? Basically, when I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to log into a financial institution to buy digital assets, then are you guys integrated with that somehow to where like
Yes.
I can? Oh, okay.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah. So basically, when those transactions happened, all of this is recorded, obviously, through our platforms and our servers, along with the historical data of what has happened on the BSV chain, and we can match that up. And obviously, with the wallet addresses, you're able to go in and do a full report of the full history of a wallet, go back as many transactional hops as you would like. It just adds to the pure compliance and due diligence side of what happens on chain. And this is all accessible through our platforms, which we can provide to end users in those cases.
All right. So it sounds like it's a KYC, AML all-in-one suite web platform.
Yeah, to a degree. The KYC is normally picked up more on the traditional side, but definitely on the AML on-chain side, this is the strengthened area now, which we come in and provide for BSV.
Got it. Okay. All right. All right. So you mentioned Connor a few times. Is now a good time for you to chime in, Connor, on some of the comments he made?
Sure. First of all, always guilty of having a beer, so that sounds about right. But second of all, maybe to make things a little bit more clear based on the title here, right? So it's really important for us in the BSV ecosystem to have partners like Global Ledger because of exchange adoption, for instance. So exchanges require these AML checks for incoming deposits and things like that. So for us from the association side, it's just really big for us to have more partners that for a company like Global Ledger, it's really important because then we can onboard exchanges. It allows our wallets and our ecosystem members to take advantage of the solution if they need to do their own AML checks and things like that. So just really happy to have Global Ledger on board. I do want to provide a slight clarification, right? So the title kind of implies that for things like digital asset recovery, it's really important to have partners like Global Ledger because you need to be able to, for instance, if there's movement of assets that are frozen or whatever else, then you need a partner to help you with that. But just for Paul's sake, so we're not overpromising exactly, right? Global Ledger itself is a great tool and platform that's used outside of just digital asset recovery use cases. So we're really happy to have them on board.
So it sounds like the digital asset recovery is just enhancing. It is like an enhancement to what they're already doing.
Yeah. So good point, right? So companies like, and Paul, don't let me speak for you, but companies like Global Ledger, they're really important because in the case where, for instance, if funds are stolen or something gets updated in OFAC lists and things like that, right? Exchanges monitor that stuff with partners like Global Ledger so that they can ensure that if a deposit comes in from a frozen address or something like that, the exchange can't accept that deposit. But for us in BSV, the digital asset recovery process is just taking everything one step further, where pursuant to appropriate court orders and things like that, those frozen assets can actually be returned to the user who it was stolen from or anything like that. So in my opinion, building partnerships with Global Ledger and other companies is just really important because we want to also show the world, our different philosophy of if someone can prove that they actually own these coins that have been frozen, then we can get them back.
Actually, through a court order.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Yeah. So with Global Ledger, Connor, are they are they opening up doors for more exchanges for consumers to buy Bitcoin SV?
It's definitely a prerequisite, because, look, another issue in BSV, right? As we scale, this global indexing model that companies like Global Ledger rely on is becomes expensive and it's difficult, right? So, and what I mean by that is, as the blockchain grows bigger and bigger and blocks get bigger and bigger, the amount of work it takes to have a global index of all of the transactions is going to get continually more expensive. Um, so having partners like Global Ledger that can do that and can handle that is extremely important for us. And it makes the exchange's life a lot easier. And Paul probably knows more than me about this, but it definitely makes the exchange's life easier to have partners like Global Ledger and others to help with that.
100%. Yeah, just to clarify on that a bit more as well. So, for an exchange to accept any funds, whether that's BSV or another chain, they need to basically go back and see, the full history of where those funds come from. That wasn't necessarily possible without coverage that we provide to the BSV chain. So this is where this, as you mentioned, Gavin, for the accessibility of BSV to be present on exchanges, this is exactly what that bridges out and creates as a platform for more projects to be onboarded, more usability cases, and just generally having the security and those checks available for exchanges to be able to run their own due diligence. So naturally, as a process, if you're like just a user onboarding to an exchange, you want to move all of your BSV there. The exchange wouldn't accept that if there was no AML coverage to see the transactional history of what has happened on chain. There's no way that anyone would be able to prove that that BSV formerly wasn't USDT and that was part of, I don't know, terrorism financing, whatever the illicit activity may have been. They now have the power to go in and see those analytics and check that, and verify that the funds have come from a reliable source. Also, second to that, what we mentioned about the asset recovery, same thing. It's just like forensical evidence that needs to be presented in front of a court. And like I say, with the security protocols that BSV have already set up through DAR, that process is pretty seamless in comparison to others that I have experienced over my 8.5 years in the industry dealing with this exact thing.
So what is it that Global Ledger's looking at when it's looking at, let's say, AML requirements on a transaction? Sounds kind of, I don't know. It sounds a little bit concerning. Where if I was trying to transfer money to an exchange and then let's say I got funds that were no good, or they were, what is it looking for? What is it?
Yeah, so we have a huge amount of flags and indicators that are attached to, it could be drugs, child abuse, scams, hacks, the list sort of goes on, unfortunately. As much as I would wish that was a shortened list in today's world, it's not. But without having the power and option to do this due diligence on those funds and assets, it becomes a bit of a grey area, if I can say it like that, without the analytics sort of powering behind that. So we run that through vigorous checks. We have our system set up with algorithms that detect the patterns, the movements of the illicit actors and schemes. And then anything that obviously is attached to that within proximity of transactions, it helps us basically define who is directly involved with any kind of illicit activity versus your average Joe who might have picked up a bit of dodgy Bitcoin and moved that into the BSV chain. They would be unaware of that as a regular user, but with the power of our analytics, that is completely identifiable. Some people can be used as mules unwillingly for the movement of illicit funds. And obviously, if they know, they will expose those grey areas and utilize them as much as possible. And this basically prevents that and gives the security all around, if that explains it a little bit better.
It does, but I guess I'm just a little confused. So you got who determines if funds are illicit? I mean, is that because of a court order that those funds?
Yeah, it depends what the illicit activity is, but generally speaking, it comes from the top of the chain of the likes of the FATF and OFAC. So, like sanctions is a huge one. A core of our development team are actually based out of Ukraine. I don't think I need to explain to anyone the global situation of what's happening that side of the world. But Russian sanctions are hot on every compliance officer's list at the moment and every financial regulator. The money's moving around a lot, and they obviously do a lot of that on chain. So we take those lists, we scrape. We have people that are actively involved in the darknet as well. But basically, we pick all of that and we compile all of those risks factors together, and then that is what our indicators are. And when someone runs a report on a transaction or a wallet, you run that against that big list of flags and indicators that we have. So that's how the checks actually take place.
So what are the do's and don'ts for the consumer here who's new to this space, and they just want to get some Bitcoin? They're like, hey, and they get it cheap. They find it on, let's say, Craigslist or one of these websites, and they meet a guy and he's like, hey, yeah, sure, I got some right here. How about this? Seems
Yeah.
fine. What are the do's and don'ts?
Yeah. So definitely, look, do of much of your own due diligence as you can. We do have a B2C product that we're launching pretty soon called Satoshi Eye, which will also cover the BSV network, where the everyday user can go in and do a check. So, I mean, to give you sort of paint a picture of an example, if you're in like a Telegram group or something, and a scammer hits you up and tries to get you invest into something, they send you a wallet address where they would like you to send your funds. If you end up going that far down the rabbit hole, you would actually then have the power to check that address and see if that's connected to any illicit activity. So it gives that layer of security to be able to have that due diligence. If we're talking at more enterprise levels in terms of how we are connected to BSV, that happens on a much larger scale. Our solutions are generally designed for more enterprise business use cases, and that is where it becomes then the responsibility and licensing obligation of an exchange or a blockchain project, that they should have these solutions in place to prevent that. If they haven't got coverage of BSV, then that stops that from happening. So the do's would be, like I say, do your own due diligence, obviously stay vigilant, but obviously knowing that you have that sort of safety net of the analytics to fall back on now, whereas before that might have not been possible. So that's really the don'ts would be, don't post your wallet address out there. Don't claim that you hold a hell of a lot of any kind of asset, and sort of keep your cards close to your chest in that essence. But yeah, really to be able to do your own checks. And I think with the relationship that we've set up with BSV, anybody who comes through the association or any projects that set up, on chain, on the BSV chain, they now have the power to be able to do that themselves to help protect the end user. So it depends what level you're going in at, or whether you're just, like you say, an individual user, or you're a business. You have that power to do those checks, which will help you for your risk committee and risk mitigation, or just to have that security and knowledge yourself.
Back in the day when there's this thing called FOMO, Paul, and
Yes,
but
you
you
aware
heard
of that.
yeah. So I before I was really new. I mean, everybody's been here, so I'm just gonna share my short story real quick. I was really, in the FOMO. Before I knew about a lot of stuff, I remember one of the celebrities was Jake Paul, a guy that I followed. He was promoting a coin, one of these coins was supposed to go to the moon, and I found it on Telegram. It was a Telegram group, and I got in on FOMO, and then it was just a total scam. It ended up being one of those like you described, where you send the funds and then everything just vanished, and I couldn't reach anybody.
Yeah,
So
it happens. Unfortunately, it's just the way that the world operates. When people realize they can take advantage of these situations, I mean, there's like really, it's organized crime, but it's run like a business in some instances. I mean, I don't even want to go into the topic of the romance scams. Pig butchering is what it's called within the industry. But there's literally people that are forced into doing those jobs, where, you know, they're set up in places in Asia, but Cambodia being one of the main sort of areas in which that we find most of the sources of those crimes come from. But yeah, it's like I say, there is a lot of genuine projects and genuine investments that you guys can make. But yeah, there are also equally the same amount of scammers and stuff out there. And this is, you know, the name of the game for us to expose who the illicit actors are, and to create safe passage for people who generally want to get involved within the ecosystem.
So can consumers go to like globalledger.io and find out who these legitimate partners are, or
Yeah. So we do run. Yeah, we open our doors obviously to the general public. You know, that they can submit their cases. Unfortunately, you know, we can't predict as and when that is going to happen, but they can reach out to us and we can work with them on an individual basis. Like I mentioned, we do have a very large global network of legal firms that we work with and law firms. Generally, we can provide the consultancy, and depending on the jurisdiction where they land, we would then be able to give them the forensical evidence for a lawyer to take to court and get those assets returned. Can be a lengthy process, but as I mentioned with DAR and the security protocols on BSV, that is a lot easier. We've recently introduced Connor to some of our legal partners as well, to help really bolster that section of the asset recovery with BSV.
okay, asset recovery. So,
Yes.
well, is that a good? I mean, that's a really hot topic. We want to jump to that. If we want to jump to that now, or we want a little bit longer on that, because that's going to be an interesting topic here.
Yeah, sure, no worries. I've got nothing to do this evening, so yeah. As long
So
as
maybe
need
you could just tell us a little more about your story, Paul. It sounds like you said you've been in the industry for 8 years. I mean, what what is your background? How did you get into this compliance stuff?
Yeah, sure. So compliance was never actually my forte. Prior to getting involved in the crypto industry, I was working in sort of recruitment and outsourcing for software development houses. So I had a very good understanding of, you know, sort of project builds on the web, and application side, project management, and just basically building out projects. From that time in that industry, I worked with a good manager of mine, and he went to work for a startup out of Poland, which was a company called CoinFirm. They're also another blockchain analytics provider. They've, as of last year, actually got bought out by Luca, who are a huge data analytics provider on the state side. But that was where I sort of really learned, you know, what the industry was all about. But at the end of the day, what we were providing was quite a complex SaaS solution, which is software as a service. So like a platform, which was used by compliance professionals, investigators, and so on and so forth. And I just got it. I just understood what the platform, you know, helped to achieve, and the type of people that utilize the platform. And then I just educated myself off the back of what we do behind the scenes, at my former company. And like I say, then the relevance of how we would, you know, help ease pain points for compliance professionals using these type of solutions. Of course, what came hand in hand with that, I mean, if we go back 8 years, the industry was a very, very different space. I'd go as far to say, you know, sort of wild west days. Still some elements of it now. I mean, obviously, you take into consideration there's been quite a lot of change since the FTX, Tobago, whatever you want to call it, the mess that they made, 3 Arrows and a few others. And I think, like I said, and I mentioned before, that really ousted a lot of the bad actors within the industry. And it's really helped the development, the regulatory space, to put, you know, the obligations and the way that the industry moves from a regulatory perspective. It really set that off, to put us in a much better position of what we're in today. And that's what I've done. I've just basically help, you know, deliver that on a larger scale for crypto companies. So but yeah, going into the investigation side, you know, I've worked on some really, really big cases with a lot of high-profile lawyers, both stateside and on the UK side, and that's really what's earned me my reputation, you know, in helping a lot of these guys with the forensical evidence, helping sort of manage expectations of victims of how possible that would be. Some cases can be extremely intricate, the dissipation of funds using hundreds of thousands of wallets and splitting the funds into very smaller amounts to try and get round transactional thresholds and smuggle the money through different ways. Uses of mixers and so on and so forth. It often creates a bit of a black box scenario for other analytics providers. But that's something here at Global Ledger we sort of really manage with our custom demixing scripts. And what it boils down to with investigations at the end of the day is the admissibility of the evidence in court, which we have 100% hit rate for. And that has been really sort of groundbreaking this year in terms of how legal approaches and courts are analysing the evidence. And that's what we've really sort of latched onto. So, yeah, I've just been involved in a lot of all of that and that I've mentioned and the rest. And it's just really helped me to sort of gain that trust and build relationships within the industry to be where we are today.
So it sounds like you've testified as an expert in court a lot.
Yeah, not me personally, but I'm the one that is sort of narrating and arranging all of the expert witnesses on the cases, the research teams compiling that and delivering it to the law firms, and they're the ones that would represent it in court. I've just been sort of the driver behind that and making sure that everything's sort of met in terms of requirements that is needed from the courts or legal proceedings, and delivering that in understandable means.
I see. So you're the quarterback, kind of directing the
rulers
on the field, managing the project when it needs to get in court. And for those who aren't familiar, like that's why that's important. It's like you've got, let's say, it sounds like you got a case of lost funds or an institution. I mean, what can you give an example of like the type of clients that are usually involved in those cases?
Yeah, definitely high profile. Depending on sort of where who the victim is, the size of the investment that they've lost generally speaks volumes for, how bad the case is. But generally speaking, yeah, victims is more on an individual basis. And then, if we've got hacks and scams, that really does mean that we have to really go to work and provide a lot more analysis, because those cases are often a lot more complex. It could be a case of internal collusion, a breach in a smart contract. We really just pinpoint, where that happened, and then we build the case from there. We track the assets, so if there's any movements, we get notifications on that, because depending where the funds are on chain, with a specific type of exchange and where they are regulated and licensed, that will be where we go after the bad actors. So we can track it up until those points where we make it possible for then, the lawyers and the courts to take action, get those funds frozen with the exchanges, because the exchanges, now it's a little bit different, but previously, in previous years, they would really listen and they'd sort of pass the buck between the different departments and jurisdictions that they were in. But nowadays, if you turn up with a letterhead from a well-renowned legal firm or from the courts, they will listen and they will freeze those funds. And that's what makes that whole process of recovery a lot easier these days.
Let me ask you this. Let's just say that I was a bad actor and I wanted to put some funds and hide some money that was laundered, and then I want to get that money and I put it over to one of those things like private chain or blacknet chain or whatever those names are that have this certain blacknet. You can't, they're supposedly private, they supposedly break that. And then I want to get it back and over to BSV or Bitcoin. What happens then? And then, somebody makes a complaint. What would happen in that case?
Yeah, so generally speaking, obviously there's full analysis done on that. So we see the full picture, kind of like Sauron's eye, if you like Lord of the Rings references. But yeah, we can get a full scale picture of what's happened, even if they've cross chains or tried to hide it in that essence. Like I say, those wallets are then registered and put on big blacklists that we share with throughout the industry. For example, you know, there's a group called the Crypto Defense Alliance where we have access to that, and there is you know, wallets and transaction hashes that are shared between all of us as providers within the industry and financial regulators, and that there is a list that constantly grows, I'd say, on a daily basis. And then, like I mentioned before, if we can detect that any of that is within proximity, we add those wallets to that cluster. And that's how we know, you know, sort of the full picture of what's going on. So for us, it's very easy to establish sort of how intricate the schemes are. And then any wallets that are involved, whether they're dormant or whatever, they've just been used as mules, whatever, that they become part of, you know, the flags in which we were able to identify the illicit activity.
So if I'm a consumer, I mean, is it a flat out red flag if let's say I bought my funds from I think it's Zuko, he's got Zcash or these other pirate chain type of things, and I got it from there, and apparently they've deleted or destroyed all the, you know, can't see what happened before that, and I got it there, then I put it on, you know, with Global Ledger, you know, is that okay? Is that a red?
For sure, yeah. So I mean, obviously anything that happens on chain is not necessarily, wouldn't just disappear into a black hole. Once we, you know, interact with the wallets that are involved in that, we're able to gain and understand the full sort of infrastructure of how they operate. And that basically comes down to understanding, like I say, the complexity of that infrastructure and all the wallets that are associated to it.
So sounds like what you're telling me is that I know, because a lot of people, they say, well, private chain is private. Nobody can see what goes on over there. And I'm just using the name because I don't know all the names of these chains, but private chain, he's got a private, you know, Zuko Wilcox, he's totally made it private apparently. And you're saying, that's not the case.
Yeah, you can see through once we get some interaction. I mean, like even like on chains that we don't necessarily integrate with and cover, we have researchers that can go in and basically find out the ins and outs of what's happening there. Yeah, it's a lot of, it's a lot of heavy lifting and a lot of manual work.
I had a feeling about that. Dude, that's a big deal, you guys. I don't know if anybody just caught what he just said. There's a lot of people promoting all these chains, like private chain and Monero or whatever, and all they're super private. Nobody can find anything on there. Here's the guy. He just told you.
Yeah.
That ain't the case.
It does take a lot. It does take a lot of work. It's
well,
not,
you know, well, the amount of work isn't really relevant. What's relevant is it possible? And you just said absolutely. Is that correct?
Yeah. I'm not going to go out and say it in every instance. You know, there are complexities, and obviously, what that then becomes is the responsibility of the researchers to really dive deep into certain chains. Privacy chains, obviously, you know, do become pretty trepid in the way that they operate and deliver their privacy coins. But yeah, once we get a slight foot in the door, that gives us enough understanding of and to be able to calculate sort of the transactional path in which they would take. And then like I say, it's similar to the mixing. Once they sort of enter the mixer, it all goes into the same pot, and then it gets distributed and paid out in different ways and methods. But that is you can figure that out with the right resources and obviously the right research team. So yeah, it's one of the harder parts that we have to deal with as a blockchain analytics provider. But there's definitely, you know, methodologies and patterns that can be associated to understanding how they operate.
So let's just say, you know, let's say that the people on this call are just regular consumers, and they got into this private chain, and you know they got money in there. Is there any way for them to rectify the situation, to put it back and make it legit now, so that you know?
Yeah, I mean, there's different ways. I mean, it just depends on sort of how you get involved. If it's from the earlier stages, it's probably more likely, you know, if we're obviously given access to those wallets as well and are able to interact within that privacy chain, then that gives us a lot more insight to understand how we can help sort of reverse that process. But like I say, what we can attach to that in the shape and form of illicit activity is really what we go in to look for. So if we know that, so like an individual user, like you're mentioning as a case here, if everybody was an individual user, we would be able to sit and go through and see sort of how involved you would be with that illicit activity that we've identified. And if we see that your wallet is not connected to that network of illicit activity, then we kind of already know that you're not directly involved and you're not an illicit actor. So we can separate that through on-chain analytics to showcase who's involved and who's not, to put it in layman's terms.
Okay. All right. So it sounds like there's still due process involved. You guys you provide the experts. The expert runs the analytics. He says, here's what we found. Then the court case happens, and then a judge has to make a determination of the facts. You guys aren't making determinations on your own, it sounds like, right? Oh, this guy is bad. It's over. It still goes to court. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's really, that's where we sort of hand it off, as you mentioned, with the sort of quarterback analysis. So when we make that Hail Mary with all the forensical evidence in the end zone where the judge would be receiving the ball, keeping along with the conversation there, that's part of the industry which I feel, really sets a precedent, because there was quite a serious case back in March time. It was the Sterlingov case, and the analytics and evidence, on-chain forensical evidence, was taken into consideration, and it was quite a crunch case for AML providers like us, because we knew that the sort of standard in which these cases were being delivered were being assessed and analyzed more at court level. So I can definitely say having a crypto native lawyer really does help in these processes. But it's also how that evidence is delivered and made to be understandable for a judge to understand, to make his final decision on a case. That's not anything that we necessarily have a hand in, other than making that evidence understandable and working with legal teams that can really make a difference, with the cases.
All right. So let's go back to the BSV Association. So now what was it that you, what was it that why did you work with the BSV Association? What was it that,
Sure. So I knew of BSV. I've had friends that have invested, and obviously, like I say, the governance that was in place before with the prolific Mr. Wright, I think was, the message was sort of delivered that this is the be all and end all answer when it comes to blockchain, and somebody making the claims that he did. I can't speak for everybody in the room, but it made and convinced a lot of people to invest heavily in this ecosystem. Once obviously everything came to light with that case, the ecosystem was still there, and the investment was still there. So once I sort of saw that case and how that developed and what the outcome of it was, I was kind of left thinking, what now for BSV? And like I say, at the conference where I met with Connor and the other members of the team, that was the question that I had at the forefront of my mind. And after speaking with Connor and understanding, what ways they were taking the governance of BSV, it led me to really put two and two together and be like, okay, well then let's do this properly, and make sure that something like this doesn't really happen again. Like I say, I think from how our interaction and relationship has developed, it's really put truth to testament in terms of what I envisioned of my mind of the way that BSV were going, and B, how we could come in and help, really, really support that as well. And like I say, I think you're really going to start to see the results of how that's happened. But yeah, just generally having an overview of the industry from the position where we sit on the analytics and regulation side, we can sort of really keep up to speed with how all of these things develop, and sort of the ways in which the different projects move. BSV was definitely in the back of my mind when you know, I was thinking about where we go, because working with protocol integrations, which is technically a level that we will be integrated with BSV to give full coverage of the chain. It's like I say, it kind of just made complete sense to me in my mind of how this should play out.
So Paul, it sounds like you know, you're talking about the Copa versus Wright case, and I'm wondering about your impression on that. It sounds like that you were wondering, well, where does BSV Association go from here? And then
Yeah.
you're saying after the case, after the judgment of against Wright, you're saying then you said, oh, this is a good idea to move forward. That sounds kind of backwards. Can you tell me what you were
I
thinking?
Yeah, I think, you know, look, there's within the industry, not just with the Craig Wright case, but there's a lot of noise out there, and you have to really cut through that noise and understand what is fact and what is fiction. You know, you can't trust necessarily what one person is promoting and saying, and you know, providing whatever evidence he felt was, you know, sort of directed to his vision of the case. But for me, when it gets to that stage where, you know, it is going to court and evidence is being produced or manipulated in certain instances, I think you really want to, before you make any decision in your mind about, you know, the ideas that you have, you want to understand what the outcome is, what the facts really are. And obviously once that played out, that said to me, obviously, you know, I was in two minds, personally from my own opinions about what's happening and what's going on. But that kind of cemented it for me when I saw the outcome and sort of the way the case was being handled. You know, the potential is definitely there, and that's what led me to sort of branch out and create this relationship that we have with BSV.
So how did him losing the case make the potential more, or make you more excited?
Just generally because, like, I think if you've got someone sort of making such bold claims, you know, it grabs your attention anyway, regardless of what your opinion is. And then, like I say, to see how that played out, I had a slight inkling that it was going to go that way. And yeah, I just, like I say, I'm working in the industry, you know, nothing really sort of surprises me these days. So kind of sort of, it was a sit back with the popcorn and watch it unfold. But in, like I say, in my mind, you know, at the same time, I was thinking, you know, okay, there's the opportunity there where, you know, to put this all to bed and to really, you know, then do things in the right way from the regulatory perspective and providing the on-chain coverage. It just made complete sense, and that's what led to me making sort of my decision around why this would be, you know, a really good venture for both sides.
Nice. All right. Well, okay. So maybe now's a good time to talk about the rules here that you talked about, the digital asset recovery. Maybe if you want to comment on that first, or before comment, like Connor jumps in, and what is it how does it work, the digital asset recovery exactly?
So here, maybe I can.
Yeah, Connor, please.
Yeah. So, I mean, overall, the general process for digital asset recovery is pretty straightforward. All that we've done is by re-enabling the alert system, which will be directly integrated into Terranode. It just allows the association the ability to enact a freezing message to all the miners and eventually a recovery message. But all of that is driven by a court procedure, right? So all that the association views itself as is basically the enforcer of, you know, if a court gives us a valid, whether it's an individual or, you know, court mandates that something needs to be frozen or reassigned or whatever else, then all that we do is just validate that it's real, right? And that's where partnerships like the one we have with Global Ledger and others will be helpful. But once it's been validated, we just, you know, ensure that it gets enforced. But the whole process, you know, being realistic, it's new, right? There's a reason that this is a process that's new, and we're going to figure it out, right? In the sense that, you know, once this occurs, it'll be the first time it's ever been done, and then ultimately, how easy is it for someone to do this, what's the threshold monetarily? Because again, there's resources involved in the sense that just going to get a court order is going to require a user to spend some money, right? So if you lost, let's say, $100, I can't imagine economically it's going to make sense for you to go, get a lawyer to go get a court order and all that kind of stuff, right? So a lot of this, at what level does this make sense is going to be dependent on, number one, someone's drive and ambition, and also, just economic factors in general. But ultimately, the process is as straightforward as, once we have a court order and we can validate that, it's not made up, someone didn't just send us a fake PDF or something like that, then we enforce it. And for freezing, that's pretty straightforward in the sense that the miners just won't accept any spending of the identified UTXOs. And then for recovery, it also relatively straightforward in the sense that once the whole procedure is identified to us as to where the funds are going, then the funds can move from one UTXO to another.
Does it have to be a court order from a certain jurisdiction?
Yeah, it was just to back him up on this. It really depends where the funds land on chain, and just to also reiterate that this asset recovery process is extremely costly, and the way in which BSV is set up, that reduces that massively. The kind of funding that you need to actually get your money back can sometimes really stack up when you look at legal fees, the on-chain forensics. Some providers do charge an arm and a leg for this, and also to provide an expert witness, they charge extremely high hourly rates for someone to come and back up their findings. And like I say, this with DAR in place on the BSV chain, it eradicates a lot of that cost. Like I say, it makes our jobs a lot easier here as well at Global Ledger, because we then work in collaboration with BSV to provide that on-chain forensics. And like I say, that's the steep part, where the last costs that are involved there, depending on the amount, would come down to sort of lawyer fees, and depending on who what whether you have a legal team to go at it or you have to go out and source somebody. These are where the cost implications come in. But yeah, it's the DAR side of the security protocols with BSV really do sort of complement this to make this an easier process.
Okay. So Connor, did you want to prevent some of the pros and cons of, I mean, I'm sure you've analyzed this in and out. You didn't just, think of, oh, this is a great idea. What are like the pros and cons of NAR and DAR?
The pros are, well, those are two separate questions, right? I mean, the pros for DAR in general is it's basically taking a real world view on how all digital assets, forget cryptocurrency, like all digital stocks, bonds, things like that, have ways, if you lose access to something, there's a way to get it back. There's ultimately, for everything in the world, if someone steals something from you, there's a way to get it back. And this is just applying, like I'm definitely not ideologically opposed to the idea that if someone steals something from you, then you have the rights to get it back. And this is basically just taking thousands of years of established legal processes and just applying it to blockchain assets. So as far as pros and cons for DAR go, I think the only con for DAR is basically that it's complex, right? As Paul just mentioned, we're talking about a distributed system, and there's transnational elements of legal jurisdictions and things like that. And those are problems that I don't need to solve, and the association doesn't need to solve. Those are real world problems that as Paul just kind of mentioned, get dealt with today. So digital asset recovery as a process, forget the on-chain aspect, is already a procedure that's being done, for all of the cryptocurrencies across the globe. There's freezing requests that are made to exchanges all the time. There's recovery attempts that are made with exchanges, because ultimately, in the crypto world in general, you can go in, but everyone wants to get out. Everyone's trying to ultimately get US dollar or whatever fiat out so that they can pay their bills. So a digital asset recovery right now is basically focused on targeting the on-ramps and the off-ramps, but if you're like me and you want this to kind of take over the world, and I want all of my transactions to be some kind of on-chain transaction, we also need a way to facilitate this on-chain. But I think the only, quote unquote con is just that these are complicated legal issues that, people smarter than me will have to figure out.
When you say take over the world, what do you mean?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm in BSV because I am passionate about Bitcoin, and I want Bitcoin to, I want billions of transactions a day on chain, and I want to pay my bills with Bitcoin transactions, whether that's in BSV, whether that's in some kind of, whether that's tokenized gold, whether that's whatever it is, right? So ultimately, if we want everything to move on chain, then we need procedures on chain to facilitate, any other kind of asset recovery process that exists in the rest of the world. And it's worth noting too that the association's digital asset recovery process is just for the native BSV token, right? But it's trivial right now. I think tokenized already has this feature. There are other token protocols that have features like that. Ultimately, building into token protocols the ability to freeze and recover assets is already being done. And you see that with Tether on Ethereum, you see it all over the place. So we're just talking about how do you handle the native BSV token, but there's ways right now that token protocols are handling freezing and recovery outside of just the native BSV token.
And when you, what was it that why did you dedicate your life here to, basically a future of putting things on chain and paying everything on chain assets? Why is that important to you?
Sure. I will try and not waste an hour here, but ultimately, I mean, I got passionate about Bitcoin for a couple of reasons. Number one, I loved the idea of money that I really resonate with the Frederick Hayek quote that we'll never have a good money again unless you introduce it outside of government. So I mean, that was what brought me to the Bitcoin space to begin with. But as you learn more about Bitcoin in the form of BSV, in the sense of what I would say is the original idea of Bitcoin, then you also enable all sorts of new use cases by the fact that you have this distributed third ledger that anybody can read and write to. And that means that you can do away with all of the issues of trust that we have in our digital society. And whether that's supply chain, improving supply chains, or whether it's like just in the sense that, okay, great, the BSV token is amazing, but what if you can imagine a third world setting up a digitized gold economy where they're transacting in gold because their native currency is not good enough, and maybe they don't trust whatever the BSV token is, right? Ultimately, the BSV blockchain itself can just be an underlying distributed ledger that all sorts of monetary systems and financial applications and other just transaction type applications can be built on top of. So for me, it's all about enabling truth, trust, and transparency into like a digital world that doesn't have that right now. You're always relying on some trusted third party, with whether it's data management or anything else, right? I mean, I'm just passionate about the technology itself, and really, I just call it a triple entry ledger, right? That's all it is. It's just a distributed third ledger that allows you to solve this problem with debit and credit and trust involved in that. So that can be expanded out to just about anything. I'm just that really gets me excited. And sorry, one more key piece is that because the blockchain, one other philosophical difference I have with the blockchain space and why I'm in BSV is everyone goes, well, you can just have multiple blockchains, right? But that actually goes against what I'm trying to build, which is if you have one global blockchain protocol, then everything is referencing one central source of truth. And that is a powerful thing. If you have the entire globe, which now the world has never been more connected on a global level, and whether it's through commerce and trade and things like that, if you have one global ledger that you're all, hey, look at that, I'm using the company we're talking about, amazing.
No endorsement there, I promise.
Then you can open up the world to more elements of free trade and trust in society, and that makes me excited.
So Connor, on a space the other day, and I invited this gentleman, John Reed Stark, to come in here. I don't think he made it, but he mentioned that we've always had. He's an attorney, and he said that we're always had third parties as intermediaries. There's always going to be this third party. That's just the world we live in. That's just the way it's always going to be. He doesn't believe in this whole idea of going in a peer-to-peer trustless world. So what would you say to someone like that, that maybe doesn't understand what you understand?
Well, actually, I mean, I don't disagree with them, right? I mean, that's another kind of marketing lie used by some of the crypto world, that like you're going to get rid of third parties. That's not necessarily true, right? But it does make third parties more honest. So in the sense of, you know, you can, so someone could theoretically argue, okay, if you use a blockchain for everything, you don't need auditors anymore. Well, no, you still need auditors. It just means that the auditors can't, they have a single source of truth to work off of, right? And if the auditor messes up, you can tell. So you don't eliminate third parties, but you do reduce, you do implement a level of transparency to third parties that hasn't existed before. So I don't necessarily disagree in general that like you don't remove all third parties, but in the sense of just a native, I pay like a cross-border payment, for instance, from me to you. Yeah, in the past you required some third party to facilitate that process, and Bitcoin does allow us to remove that, and that is a huge win on its own. But you're not going to ever remove all trusted third parties at all. I don't agree with that.
Okay. All right. All right. Fair enough. That's good. So, Paul, did you have any comment or response to that? And I'm going to start bringing up other speakers as well now.
Yeah,
Brian, Greg, and Brett and others.
yeah, sure. Yeah, just really, yeah, to sort of give my 2 cents on the reason why to be involved in it. I'm a big sort of understander and believer that this technology really does. I don't know how else to say it. Sort of stick it to the man, I guess. You've probably got within the crypto industry, I'd say a good 90% are closet anarchists and just want to see the traditional systems burn. But no, I when I first sort of started to get my head around the technology, sort of early 2015, the use cases for me straight away I looked at and thought where this could be applied were things like insurance, voting, logistics, and I think in terms of what BSV is sort of setting out to do really aligned with that, from my personal opinions of what I looked to blockchain technology for. I didn't just see it as a financial tool, even distribution of wealth, stuff like that. It just made a sort of fairer practice. And as Connor mentioned, with all of these third parties out there, they're all there to get a piece of the pie. And what this does is just give that, if we're looking at it from the financial side, that freedom to operate, and make sure that your assets, your funds, your money is not getting sort of chopped and charged up through the way. It's really, for me, something that I believe stands for the future. And financial institutions and banks, the whole sort of global way in which money moves, it changes. It has to deal with this adoption every 100 years. Even some turn of events, huge inflation costs, if you look at like the Lehman Brothers going down and all that kind of stuff, it calls for reform. And for me, this is exactly what this technology stands for. The fact that I can sort of send money through, online banks to family members and friends, in a blink of an eye, that wasn't possible a few years ago. So, from a traditional perspective, the changes were already incoming. What this technology does is deliver this on a much larger global scale, where you haven't got the larger sort of financial institutions taking a huge part of that cost, and benefiting from it. So, yeah.
Connor mentioned, he mentioned global ledger, but in a different way. I'm just thinking, it sounds like there's some synergy there. What were you thinking when you came up with that name, Global Ledger? What was the?
I wish I could have taken credit for it myself, but unfortunately, it wasn't my decision to name the company Global Ledger. But
Okay.
reality, yes, you're not wrong in what you're saying, and the way that Connor has described that. In reality, from our perspective of what our business models are, we would like to say that we have the full on-chain history for everybody to sort of refer to. So, or to go and provide analytics of what has happened through transactional history, which in essence is a global ledger. Funny that you came to that, you know, that way of describing it, and that obviously being the name that we're under. But you're right in saying that it needs to be there. You know, like you look at the banks with all of their centralized systems. There's no way I could rock up to a bank and say, excuse me, can I just see all of your transactional history that you've done over the last 20, 30 years? They'd just tell me to, you know, sod off. Yeah. You know, this is what this stands for, and to have that, you know, sort of as publicly accessible information. You know, you look at your ETH scans, your Tron scans, things like this. Anyone can go in and see what's happened there. And I think that gives a lot more sort of